All right, you're surfing up the dial, and you know it. This is Class Struggle. It's 8 o'clock. You've watched 60 Minutes anniversary show, and now it's the 21st of November. Tomorrow, Monday, the anniversary, the 30th anniversary of the JFK assassination. 1963 was a year of great beginnings and tragic endings. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was surely the most shocking event to most people of the time. Yet there were those that some people say from the very beginning knew of the intricate plan that would put the number 2 man, LBJ, in a position of authority. It I refer to as the deed. To some, they say was senseless. To others, people thought it was quite timely and served the purpose. And the moment those shots rang out, our democracy, this here republic, the United States of the not-so-Americas, was changed forever. It is 30 years later, and the killing, for those who say it was a great beginning, is now being questioned 30 years later. And to get to that, we have some guests. And also, we've got a co-host tonight, and that's Elizabeth Barrett. She was born in 1970, so she puts a slant on it for us. She has also been consumed by the horrors and sometimes enlightening, tragic events of the past. So let's get to it, Elizabeth. And this is Class Struggle.
Hi, with this evening we have 2 guests, actually 3, one's coming us long distance. We have Dr. Gary Aguilar, who's a clinical ophthalmologist, teaches at Cal Berkeley and Stanford. And also we have Hal Verb with us this evening. He's a specialist in photo evidence on JFK Assassination. We welcome you both.
Thank you.
And also we have long distance from Dallas, Mr. Larry Howard, who is a director of the JFK Assassination Research Archives in Dallas. And Larry, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Nice being with you.
Oh, thank you very much. We have a symposium coming up this week, November 18th through 22nd. And the keynote speaker for the symposium will be Norman Mailer. Hal, you'll be attending the symposium?
Yes, both Dr. Aguilar and myself will be attending, and Norman Mailer will be the keynote speaker for the symposium. He will be making the opening keynote speech address on the very first night, I believe. And we will have people who will be participating who've done a lot of research and examination of the evidence.
Larry, let me ask you a question. You know, there have been many symposiums, and as we come down here in the 30-year anniversary, can you tell our viewers what is going to make this one very special this time around, especially it being a 30-year anniversary?
Well, this is the 3rd one that's been held in Dallas in the last 3 years, and it gets bigger every year. I think the first year we had 300 people, last year 6, and we're expecting 1,000 people this year.
Okay, you expect 1,000 people, and what is it that you particularly believe is going to be unveiled or revealed at this particular symposium that's going to maybe enlighten the public on this horrific thing that has happened in our history?
Well, every year there's something new that comes out that's certainly enlightening. At the moment, I don't know what everybody's bringing forth, but certainly it's going to be very interesting.
Okay.
Well, my question to you then would be, and to also gentlemen, what was the most shocking evidence put forth at the last symposium, and how has that affected the work you've done since then?
I think we should let Dr. Aguilar. I think the medical evidence came into a lot of scrutiny, and Dr. Aguilar was part of the symposium and presented part of what he thought was the evidence against the original autopsy findings.
Okay.
And Larry, at any point, please feel free, because we know you're only on for a short period of time.
I certainly think Hal Verb has the right idea. The medical evidence is the key on the case.
Okay, well then hang in there, and we know you're there.
Larry, I hate to be speaking when I think you are not going to be with us for much longer. I find that bothersome, but let me make a couple of summary statements, and then I'd like you to possibly join us for a few of your comments, and then when you do have to leave, we can go on and explore some of the other issues in the medical evidence. In general, the best way to establish an understanding of this case is, from the medical aspect, is to understand what happened and what they found and where they found it, what they said about it, what were the wounds that the president suffered. Now, everyone knows that in a period of 5.6 seconds, 3 shots supposedly were fired in Dealey Plaza, 2 of them striking people. The official explanation was that there were 3 shots. Many people think there were more than 3 shots. And there's good reason to suppose there were more than 3 shots. We do know that 2 people were injured, and there were a total of 9 wounds in those 2 injuries. The difficulty that the official explanation has been is that it has had to explain the fact that 9 injuries were caused by 2 bullets. And that's fairly tricky stuff. You can explain the 2 injuries in Kennedy's head, the in-shoot and the out-shoot in Kennedy's head, by 1 bullet. Now you have 7 wounds in 2 men to be explained by 1 bullet, and so the way that they finally did that was to say that 1 bullet went in the back of Kennedy, it came out through his throat, it went then through Connolly, striking him in the back, coming out beneath his nipple through the lapel of his jacket, went into his wrist on the dorsal side, we speak of it, the upper side of it, emerged from the volar surface or the underside of the wrist, then embedded itself in the left thigh. Now this has caused a storm of controversy because, as you might imagine, people would be very reluctant to accept that a single bullet would do that many injuries. The other thing that makes this so-called single bullet theory so difficult to accept is that the bullet weighed 160 grains before it was fired. The bullet that was recovered and submitted in evidence weighed 158.6 grains, meaning that it lost 1.4 grains, which is not a lot to lose in fracturing a 10-centimeter segment of John Connolly's rib, fracturing the wrist bone in its widest portion, and leaving fragments strewn along its path. So most people were very critical of that. Then the problem with that bullet was that it showed up on a stretcher in Parkland Hospital not long apparently after Jack Ruby was seen there, and they tried to tie the bullet to a John Connolly stretcher. The problem was that the bullet that was found not on John Connolly stretchers, but on a little boy stretcher named Ronnie Fuller, who'd been in there receiving medical care. The first 4 people that had the bullet, including the man that found it, were later asked to identify the bullet that was submitted in evidence, this single magic bullet, and were unable to do so. That is, they said the bullet looked different than the one that they were now saying had caused all these injuries. So there are myriad problems with this. But the problems in the medical evidence only got worse. It turned out that there was a wound in Kennedy's throat. He was taken back to Bethesda for an autopsy. The president's physician, Berkeley, was with him at Parkland and returned with the body to Bethesda. The autopsy pathologist said they didn't know about the throat wound, and so they didn't examine it or dissect it. The reason they say they didn't was that while Kennedy was getting resuscitated at Parkland, they enlarged the throat wound to perform a tracheotomy. The tracheotomy was a way to allow the president, or to give the president, help in breathing, and so in enlarging the tracheotomy, they obliterated the neck wound. So it's unimaginable to me, though, as a physician, that the president's physician, who had been with him at Parkland and traveled with him to Bethesda, would not have mentioned the throat wound. Now, there's also recently been some very important evidence coming out about the throat wound. The most important of which is in Harrison Livingston's new book, Killing the Truth, where a physician named Robert Livingston. Now, Robert Livingston was the scientific director of the National Institutes of Mental Health and Illness and the scientific director of the Institute of Neurological Diseases and Blindness in 1963. And upon hearing of the assassination, he followed the press reports very carefully. He found out where the body was going. He called, said, "I am Dr. Livingston," and he had danced at the White House at parties. This is the level of prominence this man had. He's been on the faculty of 5 medical schools, including Harvard, Yale, UCLA, Stanford, and University of California in San Diego. And so they put him right through to the autopsy pathologist, which was Commander Humes. Commander Humes spoke to him and he said, "Now listen, it's very important. I hear that he has a throat wound. It's very important for you because if he got shot in the back and he also has a throat wound, that means there were 2 assassins." Now, Humes claims not to have known about that throat wound. He said he didn't know until the next day when he called Parkland Hospital. Well, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that John Ebersol, the radiologist who was doing the x-rays of the autopsy, recalled 7 times in recently released transcript testimony of calls to Parkland that night. During the Warren Commission investigation, Dr. Perry in Parkland, who had done the thoracotomy on Jack Kennedy, was interviewed by Arlen Specter. And Arlen Specter said to him, he said, "Well, and when did you hear from Dr. Humes?" He said, "Oh, he called that afternoon a couple of times after the assassination. He called that afternoon a couple of times, separated by about 30 minutes. Specter said, "Oh, are you sure it wasn't the next morning?" He went, "Oh, yes, the next morning, excuse me." I mean, it was it was one of these things.
So in light of this information, Larry on the phone and also Hal here in the studio, what do you make of all of this discussion about the throat wound and this new stuff that's coming
In my
about?
own view, I think what Dr. Aguilar has presented and what since we are now in the process, actually as this program is being viewed, the symposium will be going on. I think the single bullet theory is just dead in the water. It has been dead in the water for a long time. I think when a new book, Case Closed, relied very heavily on a single bullet theory to show that Oswald was the lone nut who carried out the assassination, it withered away. As Weisberg pointed out, the single bullet theory was never a theory, it was a necessity. If the Zapruder film had not existed, there would be no single bullet theory, because the evidence would be presented in such a way that it would be difficult to show, to have a backup theory. The Warren Commission even said that it was not necessary for the single bullet theory to be the only way the assassination would be carried out. I say that's absolutely false.
Right. Larry, you got like 1,000 people that's going to be coming to Dallas, and they're going to be listening to these two gentlemen. How many other speakers are going to be there?
Well, there's probably about 15 or 20 more at least. I don't have the Ask Conference brochure with me, but from all over the world, basically, Dr. Cheryl Waxford is going to be there.
And what would you kind of say is the reason why so many people are so gaga to really not let this rest? In other words, we have a man who's written a book called Case Closed, of which, you know, people have made, I'll give you all a chance to speak on that later, but what makes it such a fashion, and such a thing to do, to pick up roots and come to a conference on an assassination?
Well, certainly it's still the greatest murder mystery of the century and the biggest cover-up in the history of the world. If Dallas is where it happened. And it's nice to have a place where everybody can come to at one time and try to discuss what they've learned. That's why we're there.
All right. Well, we can carry on.
I just want to add something to that. I think with the new mood in the country that there certainly appears to be openness, I want to address that question of whether there really is openness in our society, especially with respect to the so-called secret agencies. I have here a statement from a publication called Extra, which is a publication of fairness and accuracy in reporting. And there's an interview here of Howard Metzenbaum, Democrat from Ohio, who's interviewing James Woolsey, the newly appointed CIA director. And Metzenbaum is questioning whether or not the CIA could be less secretive. So here is what Woolsey did. Woolsey stated that he preferred discussing the specifics about being secretive during the closed portion of the hearings. That is, off the record.
Secretly, in other words.
Secretly.
Secretly.
The message was that openness is best talked about in secret. Now, this is the world of Alice in Wonderland, where black is white and white is black. Do we really have a new openness? I would suggest not. The people who are coming to Dallas are asking for that openness to be made a mandate by the public, and that's why I'm there. I know that's why Dr. Aguilar is there. I know that's why all the people there. Norman Mailer is making an address that night. I think it's going to be an important address, but other people will be there who will be making equally important statements. That's one of the things that we're asking for, is openness about the society, openness about the files that have to be looked at. When the CIA says it's opening up its files, that has to be questioned. What files are being opened? How heavily deleted are the portions? They say that they're not interested in revealing operations and methods. Well, I can understand that. On the other hand, what is it that's being hidden from us if Oswald had no connection with the government, was never a government agent, and according to this new book by Case Closed, was simply a nut who conducted a murder that had no political significance whatsoever, and that Jack Ruby operated as another lone nut? If you can believe this, I will tell you some more tales about selling the Golden Gate Bridge and selling the Brooklyn Bridge. See me after the program.
Larry, have you read Gerald Posner's book?
Yes, I have, and I certainly have some comments about it. It's probably the most deceptive book ever written. He would lead you to believe that failure analysis in San Francisco did all these animation tests for him, and that's not true. Failure analysis hired me early last year, to help with the weapons system. I furnished the ammunition for all the tests. And then I was at the trial as a consultant for the defense. What Posner did was take all the prosecution evidence and use it in his book, and none of the defense. there actually were two juries that were selected in the mock trial of the U.S. government versus Lee Harvey Oswald. And the first jury, after seeing all the evidence, the same as Posner said in his book Case Closed, plus the defense evidence, was a hung jury. They couldn't decide what to do. The second jury acquitted Oswald on the evidence on the animation. So the book Case Closed is ridiculous. He's using evidence that is one-sided.
All right, Larry, you want to go?
Yeah, there is one of the major interesting things that he does, and I don't know if I can flip.
I don't know if I can flip quickly to the portion of his book where he does it, but he uses some vectors to show the origin of the shots. Now, interestingly enough, you have to know the entrance and exit wounds to determine what the vectors would be for shots. Unfortunately, the entrance, and here it is in the book.
Why don't you hold it up?
And I'll hold it up to the camera. Which camera? Here or wherever. Okay. In any case, here are the vectors that he shows in this book. Now, interestingly enough, he'll have you believe that that cone that isolates the vector only isolates it to the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, not telling you that the vector also includes the Dow Tex building from which there is evidence shots may well have been fired, and more importantly, that the vectors were determined by the autopsy findings, and the autopsy findings themselves are notoriously irresponsible and unreliable. So his entire reconstruction is based on a premise which cannot be supported convincingly. And he establishes it as if it's absolute and undeniable, and of course it's anything but that.
I'd like to have a say on that. On the book, I picked up the book for the first time. I got in 1964, The Invisible Government. One of the reasons why I find the book less credible than any other book that I've seen so far on it is he doesn't even mention the director of the CIA at the time, which was John A. McCone. So it makes you wonder why that man's name would be eliminated from any discussion, especially when you're dealing with the CIA, because he was the one that LBJ talked to on November 23rd, 1963.
Larry, since you're still with us, I would like to ask you if there's anything, because we know that there are going to be some movies coming out with Marina, and we know that you have a special relationship with Marina. Incidentally, your comments that you are making here tonight will not be broadcast until the 21st, and therefore I wonder if there's anything that you can enlighten us about from Marina that would be of help to us tonight.
Are you referring to the movie that's coming out about her?
Yes, or even any other information that you've been able to gather from her that you think might be of interest, that's something that may not be very widely known. I mean, maybe very well known to you,
Has he seen the movie?
But to the rest of us it may not be.
Well, she has seen the movie, and of course she was a consultant on the film, but from what she's told me, that she's not happy with the results. It's not accurately portrayed.
Well, so that a lot of our viewers will have already seen this. Is there any way for you to enlighten us on perhaps some of the corrections that are some of the things that she was not happy with, so that our viewers can have some idea about her thoughts about the movie, because they've already seen it. We'll be airing this on November 21st, and it airs. It's already been aired.
Well, I haven't talked to her that much about it. We mainly talk about the case, the JFK case. But one comment she made, I think the last part of the film shows her driving her daughters to the Kennedy Memorial, and they sang at the memorial. Well, to begin with, she don't even drive. It's just not real.
Okay. Yeah, and it's important, especially
Now, Larry, I want to ask a question of a general nature, which I think about Marina. One of the impressions I've had about Marina over the years, having read about it, is that immediately after the assassination, she was sequestered by, I believe, the Secret Service and possibly also the FBI. And the rumors are, or at least it has been alleged, that during that period of time, direct and indirect threats were made, and a lot of the statements she made at that time were made as a consequence of the kind of pressures that she was under. Do you believe that is true?
Yes, I do. I sure do. I believe that pressure was put on her that she could be sent out of the country. And I know she made statements to me that the Secret Service really treated her pretty nice, but the FBI treated her very badly.
So there were basically two, and why would you say the FBI would have treated her worse?
Well, why did they treat everybody worse?
That's right.
And from Gene Hill to Ed Hoffman to anybody else in this case, plus me. But they're still covering this up.
Well, that certainly seems to be the case. There was a note in the, I think, December 5th, 1963 issue of the New York Times saying something to the effect, and I'll paraphrase closely here, that many people who initially came forward to help in the investigation of the president's assassination in Dallas have refused to further cooperate after having been interviewed by the FBI. Apparently the FBI and Hoover made the decision that it was going to be Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone within 4 hours of the assassination. And after that, it was, if you didn't see Oswald doing it, if it wasn't Oswald doing it, you didn't see anything.
That's correct.
And that it was sort of, are there any other witnesses that you know of that have come forward or that are going to come forward? I mentioned this Dr. Livingston, who I think will discredit Humes, the autopsy pathologist. Is there any other information from witnesses that you're aware of that is of any interest?
There's a man named Sam Pate that was...
Is spelled P-A-T-E?
Yes, and he's going to be there this year. And I haven't, I don't believe they've spoken before at the conference, but he was had some information that was interesting on Jack Ruby. I'm not going to talk about it now, but there are going to be some new things.
All right.
Cool. So we're going to understand more about. Larry, you can hang on. You can hang on as long as you want. Let us know when you're ready to sign off. Okay.
I think something that's very interesting. We're talking about the case being closed. I know as a younger person myself, when I was taught about the Kennedy assassination, it really was taught as a closed case. And I think that one thing that's important that we might want to do is for the younger viewers, for people who aren't as familiar with the territory, go back and recreate a little of what the scenario was and why it's being called into questions. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the photographic evidence that you brought along.
Well, yes, if I can refer to the photographic evidence.
Yeah, let's get the camera person in.
On the day of the assassination, the first immediate, one of the early reports was by Merriman Smith of the New York Times, who reported that 3 shots were fired and President Kennedy was fatally wounded. Now that particular report by Merriman Smith was made after he had passed the overpass. Most of the people, in fact, virtually all of the press people who were in the pull cart buses did not actually see the assassination. Dan Rather himself has made conflicting stories about where he was. There's a big question as to what was he doing and where was he. He's made several conflicting stories. I have copies if you want to see the different reports. You can read his book, The Camera Never Blinks, and you can read other reports that conflicts about where he was and what he saw. So right away you had a question of what happened. Even Tom Wicker of the New York Times said the case really began after the event. That is, the actual coverage of an event. And it was actually the amateurs who covered the event. Amateur photographers who are shown on the board here, who covered, in fact, took most of the pictures that are on this wall here, which the camera will be shortly focusing on. Now here's a picture by an amateur, Phil Willis, who was a friend of LBJ, incidentally, who took 24 separate photographs. And this particular picture, I had him autograph it at the last Dallas convention. He said, this picture is more important than the Zapruder film. I said, you're right. I agree with you. It probably is. And the reason is this picture was taken at the moment after the assassination, less than a second after the assassination.
After the first shot, that is.
After the first shot.
He may not have been assassinated yet.
Yeah.
No, it looks like his head is upright.
He
Is
looks
that
fine.
something about the position of his head?
Right.
Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald is the assassin. Where is he?
Well, he is to the right and behind in the 6th floor window. There will be another photograph we will show in a short while, which give you a better perspective as to what the area includes. But the important thing about this photograph is that it virtually destroys the whole Warren Commission case. If the shot was
Let's
taken,
go back to that shot.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the original.
if we can just go back, there is the Texas School Book building. Kennedy has made the left turn and is way down by that freeway sign where he has just been shot. So in other words, Kennedy is to the left of this particular photograph that's on your screen.
I'm getting a message from the producer saying, Larry? Hello, Larry. Larry, I want to thank you for hanging on this phone, and do you want to have any parting words? Or?
Well, I'd like to say one thing.
Sure.
We'll be having the show tonight at Lee Harvey Oswald the lone assassin.
You know it.
Yes.
You know it. And I wish you great luck and success and unearthings and enlightenment down there in Dallas. It couldn't happen in a better place.
Larry, I look forward to seeing you.
See you guys next week.
We'll see you down there.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.
So let's go back to the photographic evidence that we were
I'll
looking
try
at
to
a
be as
moment
brief
ago.
as possible because any one of these photographs can be discussed almost endlessly.
But we
and
want
that-
to get to them so our viewers can
Yes.
have some
Okay,
understanding.
what I'm trying to show in this photograph is that it was taken at the equivalent of what they call Zapruder frame 202. The important thing about this is that when Willis took the photograph, he said that he snapped the shutter because he heard the sound of the first shot hitting the president. Hitting the president. Okay,
But to me, the president doesn't look like he's been.
no, because remember, you're taking the picture from the back. There's no way of telling whether he has been hit or not been hit.
Right.
I will agree with that. But the important thing is what Willis says about when he took the picture. He had no idea about the timing of the picture, but believe me, both the House Select Committee and other researchers have confirmed without a question of a doubt that was taken at the equivalent of frame number 202 of the Zapruder film. The significance of that is that Oswald, where he was located in the 6th-row window, could not have fired a shot before frame 210 unless he hit a tree, unless he shot through a tree. And you can believe that if you want, I don't.
There's another important fact about that photograph. Let's go back to that again, if you don't mind. Let's show that image again. Let's focus in on the back of Kennedy. See if you can mag into
Where the
that,
arrow
zoom
is
into
going.
that, right into where the arrow is going. There he is.
That's Kennedy.
Okay, now
Why is everything so still?
let's. One of the interesting things about this photograph from the medical side is this: Jack Kennedy's back wound is 5 3/4 inches below his collar, upper collar on both his jacket and his shirt. One is 5 3/8 inches, the other one's 5 3/4. One 5 5/8 inches, one the other is 5 3/4. Very close to about the same level below the upper collar of the shirt. Now it turns out that that's the wound that they say is on authentic photographs is much higher than that. And the way that they tried to explain that away was by saying that the wound appeared lower because he was waving at the fans, and so his jacket was hunched up on the back. That photograph shows the jacket is not hunched up on his back, and in fact,
It's not like.
Josiah Thompson, who wrote the book 6 Seconds in Dallas, got to see an enlarged copy of that, colored copy of that, and it shows very clearly that his jacket is not humped up at the time of the first shot. So I think that it calls into some serious question whether his jacket was high, and it calls into some serious question whether the back wound was as high as they say it was. The important fact there is that the back wound, if he was hit from behind and a bullet entered low in his back, and he was shot from above, how could it have entered much higher than that from his throat? That is another aspect of the single bullet theory that I think is very much in dispute.
So I would imagine, gentlemen, that you pretty much dismiss and will laugh out of the arena anybody that's still hanging on to the single bullet theory.
I don't see how the
lone
single-
gunman.
In my view, the single bullet theory just has virtually little credibility. And the people who support it have to use a backup where they have to trace the evidence back to a single bullet in order to explain the assassination, which is exactly what Posner does. Posner does not conclude, incidentally, that a shot was fired before 202 in the range that Willis took the photograph. If he took that photograph at 202, he said, "I snapped the shutter when I heard the shot." The evidence in the Zapruder film indicates there was a wiggle in the film at around frame 189 to 191. That wiggle was caused by a severe external stimulus, which is the way the House Select Committee described it. And Posner is clearly wrong in his case. And he had a very difficult case showing that it can be explained any other way. I would like to know what his explanation is. I don't see if he can come up with an explanation.
All right, so we've discredited the single shot and the single gunman. What else is being offered? What is credible?
Well, there's another important detail here, which is always bandied about by the apologists for the Warren Commission, and that is they say, well, look, I mean, they did neutron activation analysis on the bullet fragments, and they showed unequivocally that the bullet fragments that we have are clearly the same bullet fragments from Oswald's bullet, the bullet fragments that were removed from the president's head during his autopsy. Now, the interesting thing about this evidence is that the fragments that were tested and they did neutron activation analysis on were done by the House Select Committee by a fellow named Vincent P. Gwynn. Vincent P. Gwynn was asked by Representative Fithian before the House Select Committee on Assassinations whether he'd ever done any work for the Warren Commission. He said absolutely not. There is a New York World Telegram and Sun interview with Gwynne on August 24th, 1964, or was it 63? Or on August 28th, 1964, I believe. It's in that range there. In any case, during the time of the Warren Commission investigation, where he gives a detailed analysis of what he did do for the Warren Commission. And he did do, apparently, some work for the Warren Commission, working for the Atomic Energy Commission, which is who he was working for at the time. The fragments that were supposed to have been neutron activation analysis tested for the House Select Committee by 1978, and supposed to have been proven to be identical, amazingly enough, weighed more than the original identical fragments that they tested by the Warren Commission in 1964. Now, neutron activation analysis does not alter the weights of fragments. The test does not alter the masses at all. So now, somehow or another, the masses increased in mass from 64 to 78. Now, Gwynne is even further deceptive because he wrote 2 scientific articles in the scientific literature about this. And in neither article did he mention the most important factor, and that is that the fragments that he tested weighed more than the fragments that were originally found. So it seems that he's behaved not very responsibly, and that, in fact, there is no convincing proof by neutron activation analysis. What we do know is that a couple of fragments were taken out of the magic bullet, because the mass tested for the bullet in 1978 was less than that of the same bullet measured in 1964. So something was taken out to test again, and God knows whether those aren't the fragments that he tested. So if you take bullet fragments out of a piece of bullet and then test them, they're going to test the same as the bullet. I mean, there's it's a very neat trick.
Let me ask you a question. The crux of it for me, as an individual in this society, a citizen who at 11 was disturbed royally and saw the power of television bring national grief and worldwide grief to the screen. Here we are today, and we can say that something has happened that is not the way they say it would happen. Today, are we any closer to understanding exactly who could have planned such an intricate assassination where bullets are coming from every which way and doing these things? In other words, if you're saying it's not a single gunman, was it that he was brought down there? Was he set up? The whole Democratic thing that was going on, why he was there in the first place? Are there people that also discuss this at the conference and the conventions to bring about the political, sociological kind of aspects of the times that he was dealing with? Because it seems to me it's important that we understand why and how it could have been done, and all people lying, scientists fudging data and arguing why the truth is not known.
Well, I would have to say that if the case as it stands right now, and with all the implications of the case as it stands right now, probably nothing will happen in history. But there's an optimistic note, and that is that the files are being opened. Now that, of course, is not the be it all for the the final resolution of this case. But it suggests that a lot of people are upset, like you are, and we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if you people, that is, all of the people out there who are not looking into this case with telescopes and microscopes and neutron activation analysis and blur analysis and all these other
but we're just examining
You're
the
examining
day,
it.
the time,
Right.
the history. It's so timely that this would happen
Right.
in 1963 after the U-2 affair, after the Cuban crisis, our government and suspect of government people running another.
There have been several official investigations of the case, and I say all the official investigations have been essentially prosecution case. When people ask me about what I think of the book Case Closed, I don't want to dwell on that too much, because I don't really think the case is closed. In fact, there are 2 books that have
But
just
why
recently come
don't
out.
we just give people a way to just kind of say who they
The
are?
last investigation by Gaten Fonzie, who will be at the symposium, and Deep Politics and the Death of JFK. These books came out independently of Posner. They were not addressed to Posner. There's another book by a friend of mine, Ray Marcus, on the House Select Committee, and its analysis of the Zapruder film. So the books are not going to go away. It has nothing to do with Posner. And the only thing that I say is that unless you have an official inquiry and you do not have a prosecution case, actually this case, by Case Closed, the book, is really what I call the Warren Commission 2.4. That is, you have the Warren Commission, you have the House Select Committee, and then you have the .4 case. That is 4/10 of a case. But they're all prosecution case. We have no defense case because the essential participant, alleged participant, Lee Harvey Oswald, has been murdered, and the person who murdered him is gone from the scene.
But like a good Perry Mason, it is probably for a lot of investigators, they're not really into they're into bringing somebody to justice. Is there any of the kind of people out there trying to bring somebody to justice or pinpointing?
I'll just quickly add to that. Life is not a Perry Mason script. It just does not work that way. And even though a lot of us may think that we're Perry Masons, the fact is none of us really are.
When I refer to Perry Mason, I think about absolute reason and logic in terms of evidence. In other words, evaluating the evidence, not so much the type of life that he lived. We seem to find that a lot of people have refuted the evidence and have doctored the evidence to fit a particular story. Why is that?
Well,
that's what we as simple people, after you get out of all the intellectual hoo-ha, we really want to know how could possibly, after 30 years, it still is not clear. It's still not as clear as the nose on our faces.
Okay, I would like to defer to Gary. Gary will tell you that when it comes to medical evidence, there's a lot of question as to what are really the facts. What did the doctors say? What did they change? What did they alter? What's the evidence that can be consistently shown to be actually the finally recognized authority of a particular photograph? There's a lot of dispute. There were no overhead photographs taken of Kennedy's fatal wounds. Why? Why wasn't that done? If it was done, what happened to the photographs? People who were there and present should be questioned. Hume has made the statement that Fink has made the statement, Dr. Fink, one of the autopsy doctors, that there was no pressure from the outside, that the military was not involved, and that was a flat lie refuted at the Garrison trial.
So we have all this conflicting evidence, and we have an ongoing controversy. It's not surprising to me that it's been covered up for 30 years. It's surprising. Who are we looking for? All this evidence that's been suppressed. Is it the FBI? Is it the CIA? Who's involved? Who are we looking at here?
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting question, of course, and I think that the more important thing is to try to put Kennedy's assassination into the milieu, and that is there was a book called Kennedy in Vietnam by Rusk, written in 1968, I think, 1974. And he was no apologist for Kennedy by any means. One can understand Arthur Schlesinger is trying to say that Kennedy wouldn't have gone into Vietnam, or even Roger Hilsman, who was Kennedy's Undersecretary for Southeast Asian Affairs, who went on record in the New York Times last year saying that Kennedy would never have escalated in Vietnam. But even Rusk in this book, Kennedy in Vietnam, says Kennedy wouldn't have escalated the war there. Now, it was very clear by National Security Action Memorandum 263, which was signed on November 20th, 2 days before his assassination. Kennedy was ordering 1,000 troops out of Vietnam, and 2 days after his assassination on the 24th, LBJ, then sworn in as president, signed National Security Action Memorandum 273, where they said we're going to kind of stay the course. But General Maxwell Taylor understood there was a huge and pivotal difference that had occurred. And it was at that time that the escalation in Vietnam went forward. And you have to remember that at the time Kennedy was assassinated, he had promised to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind.
Exactly.
He had grossly humiliated the CIA because of the botched Bay of Pigs invasion. He did not provide air support, which they demanded when they were floundering on the beaches in Cuba. They called him up and said, we've managed to have some ships stationed nearby with some airplanes on them. We want permission for air cover. And he said no. He had threatened to raise the oil depletion allowance, which would have cost the oil people millions of dollars. And he was really shaking things up quite a bit. And I think that they began realizing that he was not going to play ball. And so one has to ask, well, who would have done it, and who would have had the motivation, who would have had the capacity? If I had to guess, I would say that the people that have the capacity to do murders tends to be the CIA and the Mafia. Interestingly enough, they've worked together on many things over the years, including importation of heroin and cocaine into this country to this day.
Well, class struggle is no stranger when it comes to discussing
to
CIA.
But I think that very clearly you can see the connection between the CIA and the Mafia, which had worked so closely together for such a long time to try to depose Castro in Cuba. you find the CIA and the Mafia had a lot of arrangements that had gone back to the predecessor organization, the OSS, in World War II. After the sinking of the Britannia in New York Harbor, the OSS sidled on up to the Mafia and said, listen, you guys got to patrol the harbors in New York here so you don't get any more ships blown up. And so they said, well, that's fine. You got Lucky Luciano in jail. We really don't like him there anymore. And they said, okay, fine, we'll let him out of jail. So they let him out of jail. They patrolled the harbors in New York. That was the end of the sabotage. Since then, there's been this unholy alliance, and this unholy alliance has gone on for a long time. And so if anybody was capable of performing it and covering up afterward, it was. I mean, I'll only refer you to one interesting quote in Anthony Summers' book called Official and Confidential, and I'll have to paraphrase it because I don't have it memorized, but it says, you know, Hale Boggs said Hoover lied his eyes out about Oswald, about Ruby, about the bullets, about the gun, you name it. And it's very clear that J. Edgar Hoover was compromised. Why was he compromised? According to Anthony Summers, Hoover, who had been violently anti-gay in terms of the way he managed the FBI, was in fact a secret, probable bisexual, and had what William Turner referred to as an unhealthy relationship with his subordinate and second in command, Clyde Tolson. And there was stories of his having wild affairs at the Plaza Hotel with Roy Cohn, where young men would be served up for his personal pleasure, preferably blonde, and he would be dressed up as a woman and would introduce himself as Mary. So apparently the Mafia, I think it was Meyer Lansky, had photographs of him so dressed and threatened to expose him to the world if he didn't play ball. Well, it was very clear from the outset that evidence was very strongly suppressed in this case that showed anyone but Oswald as the assassin. They destroyed a note that Oswald had written to an FBI agent named Hosty. They removed Hosty's name and address from Oswald's notebook before they submitted it to the Warren Commission. Other evidence was long delayed. There was a note that came forward from Wagner Carr, who was the Attorney General of Texas, that indicated that Lee Harvey Oswald was FBI informant S-172 and that they had that on fairly good authority. What Hoover had done was get file checks on every one of the Warren Commission members so he knew what their dirty linen was. And who was his big spy on the Warren Commission? Our President Gerald Ford, who would supply him with secret information about what they were doing. So they quickly suppressed this ugly rumor that Lee Harvey Oswald was in fact an FBI informant, and it was never properly investigated by the Warren Commission, who had no independent investigative arm and relied entirely on the FBI. So right from the get-go there was, and of course Hoover knew full well that Kennedy was going to depose him from the FBI after his re-election. He had to wait until that was over with, and he was going to basically let Hoover go. He'd been there already 25 or 28 years. It was time to let him go. Hoover knew that if Kennedy stayed on, he would have been dead. He had a great motivation to see Kennedy gone.
So this really tells you, you political science majors out there, that if you do your homework, you certainly can put 2 and 2 together and put a pretty good story together yourself in terms of how the government was responding back then. I can't say John Alex McCone enough because he was I would say the person that was put in a position because he was a Republican and Kennedy thought it would get the heat off of him a lot, and he thought that the man was pretty smart. But all I'm going to say to you is this: put 2 and 2 together, think about everything that has been happening here. I want to get to this skull. It's been bothering me. It's been on the table. I don't know if we've gotten any pictures about it, but like a lot of these dudes that go to these conventions and things, they bring around their little props. So I think we'll give the viewers a little understanding of how they use these hands-on props, you know, and do this. So explain how you use this.
Okay, let me
make a point.
show this skull in a way that shows best. Here is one of the enduring controversies in the medical evidence in Jack Kennedy's assassination, and that is that the autopsy report says, please excuse me, the autopsy report said that Kennedy was shot in the back of the head.
Yeah, dots.
And I'm showing you the head. Here is the head. Here is the front of the head. Oh, I'm showing you the head. Here it is. Here's the front of the head. And here, if you turn all the way back around in this way, you see the back of the head. Okay.
Forwards.
And I have dots here. These are not bullet wounds. These are where the doctors placed the bullet wounds, and I'm going to go explain them. The autopsy report said that the entrance wound was to the right and slightly above the external occipital protuberance. If you reach up to the back of your head in the midline, there's a little knob way down in the back of the skull. That's that knob right there. So the autopsy report said that the bullet wound was about right here, roughly, okay? And then, of course, all their autopsy report went on to explain everything. Now, imagine this, though, yourself. Imagine that here you are, this skull, and I'll try to center it in the screen, okay? Now, imagine you're being shot from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. There's an angle of declination of 17 degrees. His head was tilted downward slightly, but not that much, and you get hit here. Where's a bullet that is pointing downward and hits here going to come out? Well, of course, it's going to come out in his midface, right? Of course, there's no midface missing. The only part that's missing here, of course, is the top of his skull. Now, where precisely in the top of his skull is a source of great controversy. The photographs and x-rays that were taken were examined that night. The x-rays described bullet fragments that went from the front of the skull to the back of the skull near this wound back here. They said the bullet fragments went back to the external occipital protuberance. So now, none of the autopsy pathologists are allowed to see the photographs. They don't see them until they're cataloged in 1966. They look at the x-rays that night and then don't see them after that. Now, the photographer and the x-ray technician who took them say that the photographs that we now have are forgeries. Because what they show now is that the bullet wound is way up high in the skull. That's what this dot is up here. Now, imagine, I don't think there's anyone in the viewing audience who is not a doctor here who couldn't tell the difference between a bullet wound that went up that high and one that went down here. But the current view is that these guys just made a mistake. That the autopsy photographs and x-rays are accurate and reliable, and that the autopsy surgeons, including 3 professor pathologists, just put the bullet hole up here instead of down here where it belonged, which I think is somewhat comparable to a pilot flying from Los Angeles to San Francisco and ending up in Portland. I mean, it's not the kind of error that someone, you know, if you had a first-year resident pathologist who had just finished medical school make an error like that, you'd fire him. So 3 pathologists that are doing an autopsy on a president, the most important autopsy in the history of the country, can't be relied upon to come within 10 centimeters of the error.
Doctor, what ripped his skull apart to the point where Jackie O is going in a certain direction on the back of that car to get part of her husband's skull? What was the bullet, and which bullet did the most that damage right here in the top part of his skull? Where did that bullet enter?
Most of us that are conversant with the medical evidence are convinced that he was shot. From 2 directions. There may well have been a bullet hole up here. It was obliterated by the next bullet, which probably entered from the right side of the skull and blew out a hole in the back of the skull. Now, the reason I say that is that I have compiled the eyewitness testimonies of 42 witnesses who saw the body both at Parkland and at Bethesda. Now, 42 witnesses, of the 42 witnesses, 41 say it was on the right side of the skull, so they got that right. One guy said it was on the left side. So, okay, well, all right, one guy didn't see it very well and said, oh, I thought it was on the left, it was right. Everyone else said it was on the right side, so they're very accurate about that. Of the 41 witnesses who were accurate about which side of the head it was on, all of them said there was a wound in the rear of the skull. Now, 5 of them also said that the wound extended anteriorly to a certain degree, but all of them said that it was a wound. There's one equivocal one, that's a Dr. Ken Sawyer, who said it was in the right temple, but I spoke to him personally, he said it went behind the right ear. Now, I have a photograph over here. Now, I want to just show you the photographs here of the skull, and I'll continue talking while we're preparing for that. The one that shows the back of the head there. Now, you have 41 witnesses who place a wound in the right rear of the skull, or in the rear of the skull, and many of them talk about it being an explosive wound, a wound of exit, on and on and on. And we're talking about not that one, not the X-ray, the photograph of the back of the head. Photograph of the back of the head right there. You have people talking about an explosive wound of exit. And you have people that aren't resuscitating him. See, one of the big arguments here is, yeah, but they were resuscitating him in Parkland, and they just, you know, what do they know? They weren't really looking very closely at the wounds. They didn't really make very much of a careful inspection of it, and they weren't in a position to judge, and as soon as the resuscitation was over, they left, and so they had a mistaken impression. Well, they were all unanimous in their mistaken impression, placing it in the rear, and then when they take the body to Bethesda, where they're doing the autopsy, everyone there is unanimous, too. It was in the right rear of the head. Now, here's a photograph shows the right rear of the head. Now, what are the odds, since we know that evidence has been tampered in this case, what are the odds that 41 witnesses would get it wrong? Now, if people make an error tends to be random. So we already know that these are fairly good witnesses because 41 out of 42 got the side of the head right. They got the right side, it was on the right side. So 41 out of 42 have already documented their ability to be accurate about which side of the skull the wound is on. Are all 41 then going to be wrong that it was in the back of the head? Because the current interpretation is that the wound of exit, as that photograph there showed, is in the front of the head. And that he was shot from behind, blowing out the front of the head.
So where does that place our assassin?
That place is, well,
In terms of the trajectory of the
Okay,
bullet.
well, the problem is this. You can't rely on that photograph. I think that the photograph is unreliable. I think
Okay.
it's been tampered with. I think there's good reason to suspect that since we already know other evidence in this case has been tampered with, there's good reason to suspect that the evidence, the photographic evidence, may well have been tampered with. You have to weigh two things. What are the odds that 41 people would all be wrong and all get the same wrong location? The odds in that we've calculated to be something on the order of between 1 and 5 and 10 billion. Okay? Now, what are odds? Are the odds higher than 1 in 5 or 10 billion that the evidence has been tampered with? I would say the odds are probably higher that evidence has been tampered with, since we know evidence has been tampered with in this case already. Witnesses have been suppressed, testimony has been altered. So I would tend to favor the hypothesis, because I think it is more likely that evidence has been tampered with, and in fact that photograph is not reliable or representative of the wounds that Kennedy had.
What's interesting to me, as we're discussing this, is, let's say it is someone who's involved in the government, who has access to all these files, who can tamper with the evidence, but still, this is a monumental event. This is the assassination of a president. It's something totally unheard of.
I mean, not the first, though.
Not the first, but since the birth of the CIA, what is it that's going on? The CIA feels like it has this kind of strength. You know, if that's what we're saying.
So as a young person, you pretty much.
I can say,
there.
considering what else we've seen our own government to do in the 80s, it's not unbelievable to me that our government would maybe be a little tricky and something going on. Or whoever it is, even if it's not the government.
There's a slide I show in my presentations, and at the top of the slide it says, "Only fools believe in conspiracies," and then beneath that I have a list of them that goes back to the removal of Arbanez from Guatemala in '54, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Vietnam War, the falsified casualty figures, secret bombing in Cambodia, the Watergate break-in, the S&L bank scandal, on and on and on and on and on and on. I mean, clearly there have been numerous conspiracies, and in fact you cannot name I don't think you can name a single major international event the United States has been involved in the last 40 years that has not been attended by lying and deceit. Now that's my purpose in this, is that I would like to see the lying and deceit. We won the Cold War, okay, there's no more need for this. Let's stop the lying and deceit. I want my kids to grow up in a country that isn't a lot more like Russia than we fought so hard to avoid. We painted this huge evil monster of Russian communism, and now we've emulated Russian communism in
Let me put a suppositional question. This is a toss-up, sort of. If today, let's say, a president was shot, the circumstances was the same, do you believe today the type of handling of the way the president was handled could happen again if it was? I mean, could something like this happen again to America?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about that for a minute.
I'm going to let Hal answer that.
Okay.
I think it could.
My feeling is that while it could, I think because of the lessons that have been learned by all the experience of all these official investigations and the unofficial investigations by various bodies, which would help support certain television shows presenting various documentaries in support of evidence supporting the Warren Commission, it would be slightly different. However, as Peter Dale Scott points out in this very important book, I highly recommend it.
It's a superb book.
Well, we're on public access, so we're not. We're just going to say that
Okay.
it's out there.
It's out there, and the importance of this book is that it puts the whole assassination in a political perspective. The events that happened before the assassination, during the assassination, after the aftermath, are all highly political in its circumstantial and in its evidentiary aspect. I remember talking to Bill Turner, I think you were present, and he would say, you know what the problem with this case is that it wasn't treated as a homicide. It was treated from the beginning as a political murder. If it had been treated as a homicide, the Texas state would have gotten control of it, as Wagner Carr, Texas Attorney General, had recommended, and as this government had made sure did not happen, as they moved the body from Texas, illegally incidentally, to Bethesda. Once that happened, the political context was the overall position of the U.S. government. There would be no other way you could look at this. Now, what does Posner do? He takes the whole case and doesn't even suggest a political context whatsoever. That is fiction. I was trying to compare Peter Dale Scott's book and Posner's book. Peter mentions 3 particular criminal underworld associates of Jack Ruby. I'll mention who they are. They're in the book. Lenny Patrick, Dave Yaris, and James Savello. Savello was the head of the Dallas Mafia. an associate of Jack Ruby. There are 100 pages, close to 100 pages devoted in Peter Dale Scott's book. How many pages do you think is devoted in Posner's book?
You tell us.
1 page, 3 sentences, in which the third sentence says, Dave Yaris died in such and such a year. That's the political context that he puts it in. Whether you agree that the mob was involved or not, the question is, what kind of research have you done to examine the political context? The criminal underworld, the drug underworld, the gun running that was going on in the Caribbean, of which LBJ said you have a murder incorporated down there. These are the contexts that should be examined, and were never examined by the Warren Commission. Why? Because Alan Dulles, who sat on the commission, made sure that there was no investigation of the CIA, and J. Edgar Hoover, through Gerald Ford, saw to it that only the FBI's evidence was presented. When suggestions were made that perhaps FBI Hoover should be called as a witness, they said, oh, no, we can't do that. Who's going to question Hoover? I mean, imagine questioning Hoover.
Yeah.
I mean, if Hoover says that Oswald is not connected with any government agency, we got to take his word for it.
All right, gentlemen, we're coming down to 2 minutes. What I want to say is this, is that we could take 100 class struggles and never exhaust the intricate patterns that would be weaved as we tell this tale. The political side, the aspects, putting those key people of power in their place at the time of the assassination is a good place to go, I believe, in terms of anatomy and everything. You're going to be going to Dallas. We hope that when you come back, you'll be all full of more information, because I believe that we're going to crack this nut, and that carefully we will begin to see as we reinvent the government, which is the hope of Al Gore and Bill Clinton, that they reinvent the government, that perhaps they will begin to open up the government so that we can begin to explore how much we need some of these secret, invisible workings. I have a last word, and then Elise is going to tell us about what's coming up, or do we know what's going to be coming up on Class Struggle in the next couple of weeks? Did the producer tell us what the next show is?
No, actually, I'm not sure what's coming
we
up
don't
soon.
know.
I think we're going to be doing a show on animal rights in December.
Ooh, animal rights.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's something, of course, we all should have respect for the creatures from the earth.
Yours truly
And,
is a vegetarian, don't eat anything with a face, so my commitment. Gentlemen, we want to thank you. Again, we're not pushing books on Class Struggle. What we are trying to do is open up avenues of information, so it's up to our viewers what they do with this information. But clearly, the people that you heard here speak tonight have a lot of value and a lot of sense, and they are not about to take giant leaps of fantasies in order to get to the truth. So, thank you.
The king is dead, no doubt about it. We came a long way just to say goodbye. And in the end, it was the same old swan song. The king is dead, you'd never know it. But we got pictures of a different man. He's flesh and blood. No one knows